This may be a very quick video, but I want to talk a little bit about indies, and in particular, the fact that indies is this big catch-all term that really isn't true. At least not the way people use it. What are indies exactly, and what are the different categories, and why is it basically that people think that anything that isn't Marvel and DC is an indie? Maybe not the best way to describe things. Hey everybody, this is Perch. Indies as a term in comics means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It kind of depends on who you're asking and who's using the term that defines what it means. For a lot of people, indies came to mean not Marvel and DC. And this is probably more of a legacy way of looking at things. And I've been guilty of this myself. I thought Marvel, DC, the indies. And if you did comics in the 90s prior to Image, that wasn't the worst way in the world to think about things. Now, granted, places like Dark Horse, there are many companies that were legitimate companies. You wouldn't think of Dark Horse as a non-entity, but there's definitely a drop or a gap between what Marvel and DC are putting out and the marketing dollars they could do and kind of what you could find in the newsstand, which is another reason why people often classify it that way, is because you had Marvel, you had DC, and then you had things that weren't on the newsstand, and those are the indies. But today it's a much different world. There are indie comics, if you're using that definition, that outsell a lot of what Marvel and DC does, and you'd really have to be stretching it to call Image an indie. Except Image as a publisher has big comics that are promoted by big names, and it has a lot of kind of unknown work. I put it this way: if you look at three comics, if you take Saga by that crew, and you take, say, Savage Dragon, one of the classics by Eric Larson, and then you take The Pervert, that one shot that came out. You have three very different comics on your hands, and sales reflects that. Saga is a very strong seller, often outsells a lot of Marvel and DC's books. The trade paperback business is extremely strong. Then you have Savage Dragon, which has the history. It's got an artist most people would recognize in comics if they follow comics. And it's got some legacy behind it. It does not sell anywhere close to what Saga sells, and it's probably on the very low end. I think it may outsell a few things that Marvel and DC does, but by and large, I think Marvel and DC are on top of it. And then you have something like The Pervert, which is very much what I would call, and then we're getting to this other definition of indie, very much an indie book. It's an indie type story. It's got artwork that is a little bit rougher. It's by creators you might not recognize, probably don't know, and it would feel at home without the Image banner on it and just being published by self-published or by some very small publisher you haven't ever heard of. So but it can't be all three. You can't say, oh, the indies and include all three in that batch. I mean, at that point you're broadening the envelope. You might as well call it comics. So like I said, there's different ways you can look at indies. One way is that it is a book. It was a style, so it's not a cape book. It's kind of alternative, because it's kind of like how music you had pop, you had rock, you had alternative. Indie would be like the alternative. Another way to look at it is, there are licensed comics, certainly that IDW does, and others where they're licensed properties, and you have kind of mainstream smaller publishers, and then you have independents that are coming out that are bootstrapped by the creators themselves. You have that mechanism that goes. The point here, I guess, is that if you're going to be talking about the indies, are you talking about a publisher category, or are you talking about a style of storytelling? Because both Marvel and DC also recently have tried to dip their toe into the water of publishing their own indie style. Something that feels like an independent comic, something that has that kind of more coming of age type story, something that's not superhero cape driven, something that's more underground. X-Men Manifest Destiny, some people claimed that was an indie feel of a comic done by Marvel. That's fine. I think there's business to be made there if you can kind of capture that style, even though it's got a corporation's logo on it. Still kind of can meet the bill. Then you can take things that people do in crowdfunding, where they're doing it themselves, or they're trying that model out. That's certainly a different type of indie. Or you can even go people who are just making comics on their own, like some of the people I've interviewed here who have their own projects, their own things. They're shipping them directly that way, and that's what they're doing. Guys like Larry King who produces comics that way. That's what I would call true indie work. So then it goes down to I'll throw one other thing in here. It's not uncommon if you go to conventions, you talk to people in comics. You have to have indie cred. Now, what is indie cred? It means that you're not just into the big corporation, not into the Disney AT&T books. You'll go outside of that. Now, a little bit of that's just kind of general gatekeeping and people being jerks. Not much different from when, if you listen to music and you happen to listen to a band that is popular, studio produced, everything else, it's like, well, you don't really know music because you're listening to corporate music, not true music, not like the guy who plays in a subway. You're not. Well, no, not that far. I know, no, this other band that plays county fairs every now and then until anyway. I could go on this analogy quite a long ways. Anyway, that's the basic categorization. Um, it's still this multi-dialect thing just screws me up every time. What do you think an indie is? Let me know in the comments below. What's an indie comic to you? Is it a style? Is it a feel? Is it a shipping number? I mean, because we could use lots of different criteria, and if we want to, we can call some Marvel and DC books indies because they ship less than 5,000 copies. Is that the threshold? Then maybe these guys are indies. Or is it, as I said, does it have to do more with the storytelling technique, the kind of story being written, or does it have to do with the financial backing of the person behind it, how they're distributing it to the market? What is an indie to you? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.